All right, class, let's go ahead and talk about how levels work now that we've gone over histograms. Now, the image adjustments levels command, Control L on the keyboard, is destructive edit. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this first. Could do the non-destructive edit, which would be an adjustment layer with levels. You can get to that by using the black-white icon, the adjustment layer icon, down on layers, or by going to the Windows palette under adjustments. Right here, it has the levels option tucked away under this icon here. We're not going to do that right now. We're going to go ahead and go for the destructive edit, which is just the simplest one possible. Control L, or image adjustments levels. And voila, we can see the same histogram that we've been talking about. When set to RGB, it's a combination of the blue histogram, the red channel histogram, or the green channel histogram in that case, and the red channel histogram. How much red is there in the white area, mapped down here? How much red is there in the black area, mapped down here? And in the grays in between. And remember, that difference is what makes color, as we remember from Colorful Notions video that we watched at the beginning of the semester. So, that said, what do these two bars do? Well, moving this white point icon over to the left will cause it to brighten up and eventually oversaturate this here, and just starts this huge bloom. We can't see anything. What this is really going to do, if we were to tell it OK and go back to the levels again, is reinterpret everything by cutting out everything that was to the right of the white icon and then stretching out the data. If we move the black icon over, the black point over to 72, and that's the luminosity value of 72 in general, so that's for each one of the channels, red, green, and blue all at once. Tell it OK. Notice that it's gotten darker. If we bring that up, sure enough, it's spread stuff out and squished it over. So that's all that it's doing. They go back a couple of points in time. It is essentially doing this. If I were to draw a little histogram, doop boop, and then put a black point and a white point. If I move this in and move this in, it will reinterpret these 2 points and spread out that data so that this is the new black point, the point that you moved it in, and this is the new white point. So in other words, when this is at 0, this is at 255. That's all that's going on there. It's nothing too magical. If you had to do this by hand, it would take you forever, but voila, with the magic of Photoshop, it really doesn't take all of that long. In fact, if I press Control L on the keyboard, you can see that it is essentially instantaneous. So I could bring this down, but at some point I'm clipping the data. In other words, if I'm making this the new 255, it's actually adding to the 160 until it's 255, so it's like 90 something, right? So it's pushed up, but that's doing it also to the areas that are already white. So these are clipping out and just, it's white. It's not, there is no 300 or 400, so it's just all bloomed up to white and clipped at 255. So we can see what's really happening by holding down the Alt key, that's Option key on the Macintosh, drag it over. See these colors appearing? Those colors are the channels that this is clipping to. So in other words, right now, the red channel, a lot of clippings going on over there. Yellow is a combination of 2 channels. You'll see cyan, that's a combination of 2 channels. It's the same stuff we talked about last week as we were going over how the channels work. But all that's clipping to white. And eventually you get to white, everything's clipping to white. Now, black's a little different. Things will get darker, it's clipping to black. That's how that's interpreting. So a lot of the red channels clipping to black right here. Sure enough, you can see that it's all the oranges are disappearing. So it's reinterpreting it, and it's having to ditch all this data. So that's something to be aware of if you ever use the auto. The auto will apply a preset. You can go into the options to see what those preset values are. So for example, you can go in here and enhance monochromatic contrast, and this will clip color channels identically to increase, come back here, to increase contrast, to increase contrast to it, and we'll do a 0.10% clip going on here. Sorry, a 0.1, so a 1/10 of 1% clip on each one. So if you're doing scientific stuff, don't do the auto. be so careful, or if you're going to do the auto, make this a 0 so that you don't lose that scientific data that's in there. It will snap right down to it. You can do it per channel, which will mess with all of your colors, like a lot, because now we've got a green tint. Because as it adjusts each one separately, it will change the colors that are in there. Same concept again as Colorful Notions. Holding down the Alt key will also grant me the reset, and that's the Options key on the Macintosh. So if you press that, it will go back to the way it was. You don't have to worry about any of that. Going back into Options, you can find and enhance the lights. You can do a per channel contrast. You can snap the neutral midtones. So if you do that, this can actually be kind of fun. And notice if you enhance brightness and contrast, you can't snap it. Snapping the neutral midtones tries to get rid of the color cast that exists. So if you remember, the snail came off of a green background, so there's a green tint going across all that. What it does is it tries to figure out what's off and where the middle gray should be, and then correct it all automatically. So that can be pretty useful for color changes. And notice the original and afterwards. Kind of like the green tint though. There's another way to remove that, if I can do a couple of times. All right, Control L, boom. There's another way to do that though, and I'll get to that in just a second. The other thing you have is the gray, which behaves differently, and this is interesting. It will compress the data over on the left and will stretch the data over on the right. So you'll have, in this case, a spike of black, I believe, and a flattening of the white. So if we were to OK that and bring it back up, I got that reversed. Aha! A flattening of the black and a stretching of the white occurred. Okay, that actually makes more sense than what I was saying, because if it compresses it, there's less of it. If it stretches it, there's more of it. So we'll go up where it's stretched and down where it's compressed. So I'll show you one more time. If we go the other direction, so it's stretching the black, so we'll see more of it. It's compressing the white, we'll see less of it. Ta-da! That's exactly what's going on. So when would you use that? Well, let me go back in time one more time and bring this up. So let's say you wanted to get better lights. You knew that you weren't losing any important data in here. I'm holding down the Alt key again so that I can see what's going on. I lose some of the range, so I can kind of push that back in and get that back. This is really useful to do if you have clouds, for example, white clouds. It will allow you to maintain some of the values inside of that white, some of the tonalities inside of those white clouds. So, you know, just kind of pinch them in. And you can do the same with the darks if you want. So now I can bring it in as a second step. Tell it okay. And you see that this has kind of a more of a burnt feel to it. And this, you know, Photoshop is generating new data for you. It's guessing it the best it can when it does it, but it can do a pretty good job. Notice that I did that in 2 steps. I could only do that because it was destructive edits. It gets a little more complicated with non-destructive edits. I'll talk about that in a bit. I'm going to duplicate the snail one more time. Let's talk about the output levels. So notice that this right now the black point's at 58 out of 255. The white's at 255 out of 255. You can flip those around. You can flip those around under certain circumstances, such as if you're in the channels, and I think you could do that here. You'll remember me doing that. Yeah, you have to be specifically in the channels palette, but perhaps you can do it with the output. You can do it with the output. Oh, look at that. So in the channels palette, you can flip it normally because it's an individual, but in here, check that out. So that's the flipping of the outputs on the red channel. So this gets a little complicated. Here's the flipping of the outputs across all channels. We'll simply have a full-fledged turn that off. A full-fledged inversion where white becomes black, black becomes white. So in other words, if I flip these around, unfortunately on this, and if I flip it again, it'll go correctly. It's not updating this bar, which I always thought was a little unfortunate. So in other words, now black is white and white is black, and that's on the RGB. But you can flip these back around. Do that on individual ones as well. And get some really gnarly colors going on. You can see, you know, a couple channels, all that stuff. Anyway, fun things on that. So that's just changing how the outputs work. So a lot of times this can be used to dull things. If you're saying any of the output over 150 is discarded, it gets very dull. There are no more brights. and you could go the opposite direction. It gets washed out if any outputs here get discarded. So in other words, it's squishing this data so that it fits between a slimmer area. So if we were to OK this and bring it up, you'd see how it just literally cut that data out by squishing it all over into here. So, you know, not often that useful, but sometimes it is. So just want you to know about that. You've probably done it already in previous class, so hopefully this is a good review for you, and you can control that minutely. So the last little step on here are your color pickers. And now the black and the white are pretty straightforward. The sample is what the image's white point should be. So if you say that this point on the snail is supposed to be white, you can see how it brightens everything up. You say that this point on the snail with the black eyedropper tool, we'll set it to black. So that should be it, and it darkens everything down. So it's harder to control that, but it does do it across all three channels. Notice that it will resample it, so it will change the way that your colors behave as well. So if I go on RGB and I say that this is actually white, notice the color cast changes as well. So the reason that that's happening again is that it's going across and it's individually adjusting each color. Now you can do that manually if you'd like. That's completely doable. And with a little bit of practice, you can actually get some really great control out of it. I'm actually very out of practice on this, so it will not look super good if I were to do that. But there's one other thing you could do. Let's say that you liked how it's changing the colors, but so that it's getting rid of that color cast, in other words, that green tint from the image, but you don't want to adjust the levels on the snail. Well, that's what the gray eyedropper tool comes in. This is just sampling a gray point. It's not actually going to adjust the brightness or darkness. It's not going to resample things that much. It's going to move everything on the channels to say, if this were 128 pure gray, how much would I have to add to each of these channels to make all of them 128 at this point that I've clicked? So in other words, we know that the snail's supposed to be kind of a grayer color. It's kind of a green color. So we clicked in here, looks kind of 128 to me. Voila. The white and black points didn't move, but and sure enough, it looks like not much has changed, but it's actually reinterpreted the data, hence these little breaks in here. It's saying, oh, on the blue channel, it needs to be like 30 brighter, on the green channel, 20 lighter, on the red channel, 1 brighter. We'll do that adjustment universally, and boom, you have your colors corrected. Now, this is usually most useful in photography if you have a color sample board, and off the top of my head, I don't remember what they call those, but essentially they're a color correction palette that you hold out. It's just a black piece of paper, a white piece of paper, a pure gray piece of paper, and some colors. Well, in Photoshop, you could click that gray paper and boom, it's gone. It's gone, boom, it's set to 128 across the board. So what I like to do sometimes when I'm taking photos of artwork, paintings, for example, that somebody's done, is take a little piece of gray construction paper that I know is supposed to be pure gray and hold it up, and a piece of white paper and a piece of very black paper, which is a little harder to find. And then you hold all three of those up and take the photo, and then before you crop that stuff out, you tap, tap, tap with each of your eyedropper tools, and it will just automatically level everything, which is great. It looks very vibrant. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it. But sometimes you don't get that, and you have to just fiddle with it for a while, but that's not a problem. You've got Photoshop, you've got your time. You can do all the adjustments you need. That essentially is levels. Now that we've covered that, we can talk about something called threshold. And after threshold, we can talk about smart objects, and then we can talk about this week's assignment, which should be pretty exciting. All right, see you next video.